Good afternoon from our on-the-road studio in Japan. Today we have a brilliant guest, Catherine Howarth, who I've known quite a while. She is also one of the great activists in pushing the asset owner pension industry toward sustainability. If you're not familiar with Catherine, you will learn a lot from her today. Catherine, tell us your journey, your background, your big purpose, and also a lot of ShareAction because it's quite an amazing organization. And thank you so much for doing this. I appreciate it.
Oh, hi, Robert. It's really good to be here, and I'm excited to talk to you today and also reach your incredible network and um, uh, yeah, your network around the world. So I've been the chief executive of a not-for-profit in the UK that's called ShareAction for a long time, since 2008. And that's been a period of extraordinary growth in sustainable investing and responsible investing. And then more recently, we're in really troubled waters, and I'm sure we'll come on to that later in the conversation. But you asked me about my background, how I got into this work. I used to be, I've always been an activist, but I used to be more of a community activist. And many years ago, 25 years ago, a bit more, I, with a group of amazing community organizations in the East End of London, started a campaign for the real living wage in the UK. It was actually inspired by what we'd learned from the real living wage movement in the United States. In the city of Baltimore, a
Wow.
pioneering law or ordinance had been passed at the city government that required the payment of a real living wage to low-paid workers across the city of Baltimore. And we were really intrigued by that because London at that time was a city with still is a city of great inequalities, a huge population of low-paid people, including many migrants. So we launched this campaign for the real living wage, and someone said, "Well, why don't you buy some shares in Barclays Bank and HSBC Bank?" Because at the time they were building their new world headquarters at Canary Wharf, which was burgeoning into the extraordinary financial district that it is today. It was And so I did. I still own the 5 shares in HSBC that I bought in 2001. I went to the AGMs with actually a cleaner who was cleaning the office tower, the main office tower at Canary Wharf, and moved into the HSBC tower. And we asked questions of the board of directors, and Barclays Bank became the first listed company in the UK to make a commitment to pay the real living wage to all of the contract cleaners, to write that into the contract price for cleaning. And so I got this kind of beginner's luck in shareholder activism, and I thought, wow, you could really change the world using the power of shareholdings. How do I get deeper into this? And at that point, I didn't have a background in finance. I had a degree from Oxford University in history. I remain really interested in the power of history to inform our thinking today and help us imagine a different future. But I didn't know about finance, but I did belong to a pension scheme. And it was a scheme that had been started in the 1940s with quite a democratic constitution that allowed any member to put themselves forward for election to the board. So I put myself forward for election to the board of my pension scheme, and I was elected by the members of that scheme, which was one of the largest multi-employer pension schemes in the UK. So suddenly I was the fiduciary, and rapidly getting an education and a training about triennial valuations and actuarial science and capital allocation, and but like being a little bit of a banner waver on that board for responsible investment practice, and firmly believing that pension schemes should operate in a more democratic way. It's other people's money, it's members' money. We expect and just assume that the boards of directors of companies will be elected, my 5 shares in HSBC allow me to attend the AGM of the company and elect the directors along with all the other shareholders. But in pension fund land, we don't have those same rights. Pension funds mostly don't hold an AGM, and they
Mm.
don't allow their fiduciaries to be elected by the members. So these have always been kind of lessons that I've taken into the work over a couple of decades now at ShareAction. And ShareAction is an organization that tries to support the institutional investment world to act in a way that manages long-term risk and acts with integrity in avoiding investments that create real problems for people and planet and for the members of pension schemes. So we work across a lot of different issues, but I'll let you ask some questions and shut up for a bit.
When I want to get back to that living wage, what was the living wage at that time that you were trying to get from Barclays? And did they agree to? Well, I mean, I don't couldn't think of anybody who works at Barclays. Maybe some of the cleaning people who don't have a living wage, but that's farmed out. They're not employees. So how did what was the living wage?
So it's at the time, the UK government, which was then led by Tony Blair,
Hmm.
had just introduced a national minimum wage, which was a major commitment of manifesto commitment of the Blair administration, and it was part of their commitment to a shift in a more progressive direction after the Thatcher major years of Conservative administration in the UK. And the minimum wage had been introduced in the end at a very low level. Because a lot of economists has advised that if we introduced a minimum wage at a high level or at a decent level that actually meet people's living costs, we'd have mass unemployment. Actually, interestingly, that was proved hugely wrong, and the
Mm.
minimum wage has risen bit by bit as the evidence has shown in the UK that it's not incompatible with very high levels of employment across the economy. But anyway, there was a lot of fear mongering by economists sitting in universities about what would happen to employment. And so the minimum wage was introduced at this low rate, which prompted us in London, where costs of living are high, to propose a real living wage based on living costs in London. And so the demand that we made of the banks was that in issuing contracts for cleaning services, security services, catering services, that they should take responsibility for the wages of people that worked on their premises to be paid the real living wage, the London living wage.
Right.
And you're right, at the time, the bank said, well, we don't employ these people. Why would we take responsibility? And we said,
Yeah.
no, they perform services for your company on your premises. You should ensure that they're paid enough to make ends meet in one of the world's most expensive cities. And you can afford to do so. Look what you pay your bankers, your investment bankers. So it was a powerful argument. It had the public on side, and Barclays made this commitment, got glorious coverage for it, huge kudos and like big BBC news coverage. And HSBC then was kind of compelled to follow suit, even though the chairman of the bank at the time had really held out and said, these wages are none of our business. The market will decide the price of cleaning contracts. So it was a really interesting climb down for HSBC, compelled, if you like, by Barclays' decision to go for it. And one of the lessons I drew, lifelong lessons from that, was how you can drive the competitive spirit between large financial institutions into a race to the top and not just a race
Yeah,
to the bottom.
yeah, that is true. I remember I was asked by a very successful bank fund manager. They said, we're interested in, can try to convince us in 30 minutes why should we embrace sustainable investing? And I didn't need very long time because they just wanted to know what their competitors were doing. which is so the race to the top or race to the bottom, that they just that's what they look at. They're not looking, well, how do I measure CO2 emissions from a cement factory in Tanzania? They just want to know what their competitor is doing at the large scale. Um, Share Action has been around for quite a while. Who are your members? Are they pension funds or are they service providers or are they individuals?
Yeah, so we're a registered charity, so we're a not-for-profit, and we consider ourselves to be accountable to civil society ultimately for what we do. But we don't have members per se. We have donors and
Oh,
funders.
okay.
That's how we're resourced, and all of our funding comes from either individual donors giving to a charity, which of course is a tax efficient thing to do, or endowed philanthropic foundations. And we're very grateful to all of our donors who help us to do the pioneering and cutting edge and fearless work that we attempt to do in this space. We take no funding whatsoever from commercial entities. That's been a red line for us from the very beginning. It's given us a lot of independence. It also makes life quite tough in terms of
Mm.
raising revenues required to deliver the, investment grade analysis and research on both companies and financial institutions. That is our hallmark. But it's worked for us for 20 years, so um, not giving up on that approach for now.
And so most of your work is researching um, fiduciaries, pension funds, sustainability. Where is the focus?
We do a real mixture of research on institutional investors and research on investee companies. And we produce kind of guidance and sort of best practice materials for asset owners. We actually, in the early days, we did do analysis that ranked pension funds against each other in this area. And I do think it can be very productive to make those comparisons and sort of foster a little bit of friendly competition within the asset owner world as well. But they're not natural commercial competitors typically. So most of our analysis, we do a major biannual report um, called the Point of No Returns, which looks at the world's largest fund managers. And of course, asset owners find that incredibly helpful and useful in order to understand not just the performance on sustainability and responsible investment practice of their own fund manager, but to see how that compares with other comparable firms out there in the marketplace for asset management provision. And then we also do, in order to inform the stewardship campaigns that we run to encourage large institutional investors to use their shareholder rights in a way that drives more um, positive and positive impact outcomes from different sectors across the real economy. We do a lot of research on, for example, the real estate sector, the chemical
Mm.
sector, the retail sector, on lots of different ESG themes. So, we have this long-running work on the real living wage, which started for me 25 years ago, and Share Action's also been working on that for a long time. And recently we focused on the major supermarkets in the UK. So we've produced a lot of really good analysis um, on you know wage and human resource policies across the supermarket sector. But we take a global look at firms. We've done substantial work on the food manufacturing sector, looking at the health impact of the likes of Nestle, Mondelez, PepsiCo, Kraft Heinz, and so on. And then again in chemicals, we look right across the global chemical sector. My team with a group of investors had a meeting with the CEO of BASF, the world's largest chemicals company, yesterday, pressing BASF to decarbonize its global chemicals operations. They're building huge sites in China, and it just doesn't make sense for the chemicals industry to lock in very high carbon plants to produce the chemicals that the world needs. So that's just an example. So the corporate analysis is quite global and cross-sector. And then we do take this very deep analysis and look at asset management. And I think that's some of our most high impact work, to be honest, because not that many people do analysis of the fund managers looking at these factors.
Mm, yeah.
So it's really added value, and it's really kind of a decision useful information for asset owners. And I'm pleased to say that we are seeing a number of UK and European asset owners, pension funds, move money away from US fund managers that in the last couple of years have really retreated from commitments on sustainability and moved that money to asset managers that have sustained a commitment to
Oh,
deep analysis and action to address both company specific and systemic sustainability risks that are very financially material for pension fund members right across the world.
and your focus is the research of the various industries as it relates to their sustainability impact, I would imagine. Do you also do a lot on engagement, on analyzing that?
Yeah, absolutely. That's a hugely important part of what we do. It's not easy to get at it, but it's not that impossible either, I have to say. So what we're looking for is not just does a given asset manager have robust analysis of company sustainability performance, but more to the point, are they capable and are they committed to using the leverage and influence and the shareholder rights that they hold on behalf of asset owner clients and ultimately pension savers across our economies? Are they willing and able to use that influence to drive stronger commitments from investee companies on sustainability? And that's the kind of big differentiator as far as I'm concerned. Like we know that the world's largest fund managers, which are all US based, have the power, but they're completely or largely unwilling at the moment to use it to drive stronger risk management in the area of sustainability from companies. And they have the power, they won't use it. So, but my long experience in this space shows and tells me that even modest sized investors, armed with the right arguments, making a strong and compelling case to corporate management, can be very, very influential in encouraging the boards and senior management teams and CEOs of large firms to make meaningful and positive commitments to dial down negative sustainability impact and to dial up positive sustainability impact. So you don't have to be a BlackRock or a State Street to have real impact. It is a shame, I think, that the world's largest fund managers are not, really using the weight that they carry to address these material risks on behalf of ultimate clients and beneficiaries of pension scheme clients.
Yeah, it was amusing when Trump started to have this big pushback against ESG in some of the states like Texas and Florida, how quickly they caved, thinking, you have like 10 trillion and you're afraid of a state treasurer in Florida that might pull a few bucks. You're such an influential person.
Well, I mean, look, let me be I think the situation for those fund management groups is not straightforward. I actually feel they are in a very, very tricky spot. And they've had these threats of withdrawing of mandates by Florida and other states, but they've also been taken to court in those states. And there's quite aggressive litigation towards those groups. I mean, one of the really interesting things is the case in the Florida courts, the defense put up by those groups was the accusation made was that they were undermining, this isn't a court case, they were undermining America's economy by not supporting the coal sector in the US.
Hmm.
And their defense in court was, well, our engagement was never very effective, so you can't accuse us of being of undermining the coal sector, which really kind of highlights the challenge we've made at ShareAction over many years, which is that these very large US fund managers were certainly not as effective as they could and should have been, using the rights that they they hold on behalf of other parties, pension funds in particular, and their members. So it's been a very illuminating journey, watching those court cases, and one can only feel for those big US groups because they're the fund managers because they're sort of stuck between a very aggressive campaign, very politically motivated, it feels, in the US, applying pressure on them to, walk away from so-called woke capitalism and ESG. And on the other hand, they've got, in my view, more rational clients all across the rest of the world saying, well, we fully expect you to manage ESG considerations and to steward our investments in order to reduce financially material ESG risks. So it's a tricky time. Not that one sort of feels too much sympathy for these enormous fund management groups that are well able to look after themselves, if you like, but they do face real tensions in terms of the global sort of viewpoint on these issues in different regions of the world.
We once had Andrew Bahar, who you probably know from As You
Yeah.
Sow. So he was also he got a court mandate to testify along with Larry Fink, and I mean they're a nonprofit. So and his interpretation was that the reason that there was so much pushback because it was being effective in changing corporate behavior, which is why there was so much pushback. Uh, I don't know
So
if
yeah, hang
it's
on a minute. I think this work can be really effective, and that's why I've devoted much of my life's work to it. I just to reiterate, I think it's extremely possible for um la institutional investors, even retail investors, as I proved with Barclays all those years ago, to have a significant influence on management thinking and management decision making. I think what was happening in the US is that you were under pressure from clients, including European clients of BlackRock, State Street, Vanguard. They were being pushed to be much more effective and use the powers that they had. And indeed, there were concerns, certainly in industries that wanted to just stay operating exactly the way they were, particularly fossil fuels, that if you really brought the power of BlackRock, Vanguard, and State Street to bear in the direction of sustainability, well, that would be very, really meaningful and really threatening to the status quo. So I think Andrew is right. Um, and also I'm right, I think, in saying, look at how disappointing it is to see those fund managers really retreat from even beginning to do the small amount of work that they had really started to get going on. So yeah, I think that, well, at least that's how I see it.
we recently, actually yesterday, I think it was yesterday, we did, no, the day before, we did an interview with a gentleman, journalist, Fernando Morales de la Cruz. I don't know if you know him.
I do
So,
know him, yeah,
oh, you do?
I do.
Okay.
No.
So he's very, very proactive in stopping child labor, often forced labor. And he was talking about how active he is trying to engage with the sovereign fund of Norway because they have in their constitution it's against the law to engage children at a certain age, and they're investing in Nestle and all the chocolate manufacturers who work with children in their supply chain. And he's quite aggressive in that. He's very passionate about what he's doing. But he says it's really a lot of the funds that talk about sustainable when they bring up this, very few of them actually engage or push the companies where they own a significant share to change that behavior. Do you think, what do you think the trigger should be to get them to take it more seriously, or are there other topics on their list of things to address on sustainability that that kind of group is not politically influential, so we can't, that's why we're not doing anything about it?
Well, it's certainly true that the children of the world don't have much influence in the capital markets decision making of the world. So yeah, he's got to be right about that. And yeah, he is a very passionate, I'm very impressive and dedicated advocate, and he's shining a light on something that he's right is a little bit shoved under the carpet.
Yeah.
Uh, and I but it helps me make a point I really wanted to draw attention to. So when you ask pension savers, like working people around the world who contribute month in, month out into a pension scheme, it sort of disappears into this black box, which is global capital markets, where someone else is paid usually a great deal more than you as a working person paying into the pension system to manage that money on your behalf. When you ask those people who belong to pension schemes, the ordinary members, about different ESG topics that are, important to them or that they think really matter, child labor comes up like pretty close to the very top.
Oh,
But
really? Okay.
it's not an issue that, yeah, people really do well, labor practices comes high and people tend to think that you should sort of start with, that old Victorian view that maybe we should get the children out of the factories and out of the fields. And in the 21st century, still a lot of children at work right across the world, producing and helping to produce commodities in particular that end up on our plates and in our chocolate bars and et cetera, et cetera. So it's a real thing, it's a real challenge, and it's one that really counts for uh, pension savers when they're asked about issues that really resonate for them. But the way we've defined responsible investment is is in capital markets at the moment is very much this view that we'll look at ESG issues to the extent that they produce financial risk, short, medium, or longer term, as opposed to saying, well, we think so the such and such activities are just wrong and we don't want to have them as part of our business practice. Um, and one of the reasons that I think pension funds kind of get reluctant to do too much engagement with their own members about their views on these things is that people tend to say, well, such and such is wrong. I don't like that. Rather than, I think this activity may reduce the value of my pension fund over time, and therefore I don't want to be invested in it. So there's this kind of slight tension between those slightly different worldviews, or ways of thinking about responsible investment, and I think that it would be my own view is that if our pension fund industry globally was more informed in its prioritization by the views and preferences of members, we would
Mm.
see a slightly different balance or mix of issues. Of course, we'd still see all the issues that relate to managing financially material ESG risk, but we might also see some of the issues like child labor bubble up, where, the fact is, unfortunately, it's quite profitable to employ children in fields. And so there isn't much of a business case for ironing that out, other than maybe taking a bigger picture view that economies with well-educated children ultimately are more productive and can flourish in a way that's beneficial to pension savers and to all of us. But anyway, I'm really interested in, and as I think about the next few years for ShareAction, in work that doesn't just bring to bear excellent financial analysis of different sectors and their sustainability performance and how that might impact long-term returns, but also in a capital market system that's accountable and listening to the people whose money they invest. And I hope that over the next few years, ShareAction can do more to bring the voices of real pension savers into this system.
I don't know the regulatory issues in the UK. I'll be very honest about that. But I was in the Netherlands, it's very strict, very inflexible. If you work in the metal industry, you have to go to this pension fund. If you work as a teacher, you got to go to this pension fund. You have very little say in how the money is managed. Whereas in Sweden, you can take a portion, a percentage of your money out and do with it as you want. You want to party, fine. You want to invest, that's also cool. So why is it that you can easily switch electricity providers every day if you want, at least in the Netherlands, I guess in the UK, or telecom providers, but you have no opt-in at all in the pension fund, in, getting out, how you want the money. If what you're saying is right, that the individual pensioners are passionate about certain issue and they don't want to make money off of the pain and suffering of, in this case, children or bad human rights abuses, that would be a more effective way of getting change and interacting with the pensioners. It's their money. I know that you're the guardians of that. You're paying an asset manager a fortune who doesn't always perform. I mean, even Warren Buffett made a bet once with his hedge fund whiz kid. I'll bet you an X amount of money that in 10 years you're going to do all your fancy hedge fund garbage. I'm going to invest in the cheapest index fund that exists, Vanguard, whatever, the lowest fees, and I'm going to beat you. And he beat him really badly over the 10 years, and that won the bet, and that money he gave to charity. So, and he just proved that, it's very hard to beat the market. So why not just either uh, give more freedom to the pensioners, their money, because in the Netherlands, there's a lot of complaints that the actual payout that they're getting from what they're putting in seems to be rather skewed. And same in Singapore and other places. So that was a little bit of a rant, sorry.
No, no, no. So it's a very, very interesting question, and observation that in different jurisdictions around the world, this system of pensions and retirement income, is organized in really different ways. So, in Australia, any pension fund member, they call them superannuation
Yeah.
funds. So you're a member of a super fund and you can pick whichever fund you like. So whoever you're employed
Oh,
by, your employer is uh, required to give a very substantial amount of earnings, and you are too. You both they and it's compulsory in Australia to contribute quite chunky amounts into the superannuation system. But you can pick whichever scheme you like. They have a real marketplace for pension provision in Australia. In the Netherlands, as you say, if you're in a certain industry, you'll be in that industry fund. Um, that's in the UK, your employer chooses a pension fund, and if you want to have your employer's contributions, you have to go along with that scheme, that pension scheme, even if it's a poor performer relative to others, which is quite an, I think, untenable and unsustainable design fault in the UK system. But uh, it's quite early in its journey because although we've had a pension system for many years in the UK, the system that most people the schemes that most people are in the UK was designed only about 12 years ago in legislation that created an obligation on all employers to put their staff into a scheme, and the employer chooses which scheme that will be. And then in Denmark, they have super democratic arrangements where or many of their pension funds, not all, I think, hold an annual general meeting, which allows the members to raise issues and be heard and elect the fiduciaries of the fund. So such a range out there across the world of different governance mechanisms, different market mechanisms. Um, and what I will say is that across the world, the schemes that are not for profit have quite strong evidence of outperforming relative to the pension providers where there's also shareholders in the background looking to make returns from the provision of pension investment services. And especially in Australia, it's really like interesting evidence that the not-for-profit super funds have significantly outperformed in terms of investment return over the for-profit providers that also have shareholders that are taking a take in the background. Um, so yeah, I think there's a sort of giant mixture of mechanisms and systems and organizations like the OECD, but also Mercer do some really interesting research to look at all these different systems and which ones produce the best outcomes for people. But it's my conviction that any kind of institutional arrangement that's in charge of other people's money and makes decisions on their behalf should be accountable to those people. There should be mechanisms that allow people to ask a question of their pension fund trustees at least once a year at an AGM, let's say. That seems like a bit of a no-brainer. And particularly when these are collective investment vehicles, you could have 99% of the members be fast asleep and just 1% of the members being alert and challenging and asking questions in a way that actually results in benefits flowing back to the 99%. You know, this is the wonderful thing about pensions. They're collective investment vehicles. So, well, the good news is that if you've got good decision making and good challenge and accountability, that benefits everyone. The bad news is that if you've got bad decision making, a lack of accountability, then the whole pension fund membership can um, suffer the consequences of that.
And I'll be very frank. I was never a big fan of engagement, mainly the way that it was done. It was a good moneymaker for the service providers, but it took a really, really long time to get behavioral change of the companies. I was amazed that you were able to get Barclays, from standing up there for a living wage just from that one. And we spoke to very large pension funds who had a completely reevaluation in the last 2 years of, we're spending a lot of money on engagement. Are we getting behavioral change? And years ago, we were approached by an activist hedge fund in London who wanted to create an activist hedge fund kind of second generation engagement. So instead of investing in the best of class and trying to schmooze with the company, we're going to invest in the worst of class. We're going to invest in the absolute dogs where sustainability is clearly material. So not a personnel company, but maybe a chemical company or a transport company. And they engaged us to introduce them to some pension funds. And there was incredible interest in that because theoretically, this is theoretical, that if we invest in the worst of class with low share price, and we tell them, don't only increase the share price, get rid of the toxic companies, integrate sustainability, improve the HRM, or we'll kill you, that your share price would go up quicker in a shorter period of time, theoretically. So we got pension funds really interested to invest, and I completely miscalculated the London tabloids because there was a very vocal divorce between the CEO and his wife. It's every day. It was all the time. And the pension fund they were talking to hate publicity, so they walked away from it. And until now, I haven't seen anyone do like second generation engagement, investing in the worst rather than the best.
I'm sorry to hear that experiment never happened.
Yeah,
Because
I was
I've
too.
always thought it was a really good proposition myself. I do believe in engagement. I know it can work, but I also think it takes incredible skill. So there's a lot of you know, talk. You've said most active management doesn't work compared to indexing. And most engagement doesn't work and is poorly executed, but it can be done. It does take great skill. In my view, the reason we were successful all those years ago at Barclays is partly because um, the engagement, the shareholder engagement, took place in the context of a much broader campaign effort with a lot of coverage. And I think if you're going to be successful in engaging companies, you actually need quite a broad set of tools, which is one of the reasons why civil society campaigning organizations working in alliance with institutional investors are some of the most effective engagers out there, because we that really broadens the toolkit
Mm.
in terms of what it's going to take to shift thinking. A combination of applying the pressure of very large institutional investors with NGOs that use other tools and tactics to shift public attitudes and engage the interest and self-interest of companies in managing their reputation, etc., and policy levers as well. It's that combination of things that delivers success, and it's not simple to do.
Does ShareAction do kind of research, educational training for pension funds on how to be more effective in engagement?
Well, we describe our work as a laboratory of practice. So, in all of the work that we do, engaging really large companies, we know that we can never engage all the companies where there are sustainability problems. We're just a mid-size NGO. What we try to do with those specific engagements with given specific companies is sort of use them to inform and engage the participating investors. We never we don't engage with companies on our own. We always do it as part of a grouping with often some extremely large, but then also some mid-sized and smaller mixture of asset owners and asset managers round the table with those companies. And that's where the learning happens. It doesn't happen in a classroom. It happens in the context of a real dialogue where you go in with world-class analysis. You think through, who am I sitting opposite? What's the self-interest of the CEO? What's his career story? Where's he going? Why would he agree with what we want to, it's a skillful process. And I think people learn by doing, including us at ShareAction. We're always learning. We can always get better at this stuff. But yeah, so that's how we we develop expertise, I think, is in the real crucible of actual action rather than in a classroom setting.
And how do you, I mean, when you're dealing with, I guess it's hard to find large pension funds that are not looking in one way or another, maybe actively or passively, at sustainability as not only a risk issue, but also at outcomes, because most of the time they're just looking at the risk issue, but not the outcomes. How have you found to get buy-in from someone who's doing nothing to someone who's doing more?
Well, it's the same as for companies. It's about the stakeholders. So, when a pension fund has stakeholders, let's say the participating employers or the participating members or the pensions regulator, those are the stakeholders that count for pension schemes. If 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 the stakeholders are expecting it, and you also have staff and board members at a given pension scheme that actually have thought this through and think it matters. It's relevant to the fiduciary duty of that scheme to act in the best interests of its members, that it engage in a serious, properly resourced, and disciplined way with all these themes. Then yeah, you can, those schemes can really perform well. But there's a vast, there's a large number of pension schemes out there that aren't that serious about this, aren't that rigorous about this, aren't that disciplined about this, don't resource it properly. There's a lot of greenwashing in pensions, just as there is in the corporate community and in the asset management sector.
The every time we did TBLI conference, we invited the research providers for ESG leading research. They always said, "Don't put me on the same panel with this one, my competitor." And they always refused, always. So a year and a half ago, or so 2 years, we launched the Better World Prize, which is kind of an open source database to provide comparability of the different ESG measurement systems and impact frameworks and that. So we got 44 independent companies presenting their methodology. Some very interesting, some very creative, some only looking at one KPR, the board, nothing else. Um, but I knew it was going to happen, that 100% of all of the large, well-funded measurement they all refused to participate. So whether it was MSCI, PRI, Carbon Disclosure Project, B Corp, EcoVadis, which raised $750 million to do that, uh, or well, and that. So, and lately, Bloomberg said there's 50 trillion going into ESG, and I think, wow, it's 50 trillion going into ESG, serious ESG. Wow, we'd have no problem with climate change. So it seems that the whole ESG has become more like a fitness club where everybody wants to show they have a membership card, but nobody goes.
Yeah.
Do you
Well,
become frustrated with that?
yeah, of course I am. And actually in a way, I have to thank Donald Trump for shaking all of this up, because it really deserved a shake up. And it is very depressing that we still have emissions rising and, huge problems, which all this sustainability activity in capital markets seems to have done absolutely next to nothing to really influence. So there's a lot of learning and there's a lot of humility required in the space. There's a lot of tougher regulation required, and we aren't getting it now. We need to move away from voluntary initiatives which have fallen apart, and move to robust regulation by public interest financial regulators whose duty, in law, is to serve the public interest in regulating and overseeing, supervising the activities of financial institutions that make claims in this area. The latest from the UK Financial Conduct Authority is a proposal to regulate ESG ratings providers, which I think is a good step and important. So yeah, we are not yet touching the sides. And at the same time, would I say, should we just give up and say that capital markets actors have no responsibility whatsoever and shouldn't be held to account for the influence of their decisions on the world's great sustainability challenges? Certainly not. And we at ShareAction will continue to define the standards we think are appropriate, hold accountable, and make transparent the performance of large financial institutions against those standards, and build what I hope is a movement with deeper roots amongst the wider public, whose money is managed by these professional investors, to demand better and demand more.
Do you think with all of the AI and fintech things, will there be a need for all of these overpaid alpha males in the financial sector? If you can just like fill in, this is how I want my money managed, and the AI every month takes a certain amount and does the investment, and your fees are very low, and maybe the performance will be better, or I'm not sure. I don't think it'll be worse.
Yeah, I'm kind of intrigued by that. So I think that a lot of what happens in capital markets, where enormous salaries are paid, can probably be replaced by machines that do a better job.
Mm.
I think the kind of work that I'm involved in, which involves negotiation between
Mm,
human beings, the investors in companies and the corporate management of companies, the members of pension schemes, and on the other side of the table, the fiduciaries that make decisions on their behalf. These are things that I think, uh, and I say this cautiously because I'm actually quite intrigued and open-minded about all the many uses that these extremely interesting new technologies, in particular, uh, AI. So maybe what I do could also be replaced, but I certainly at the moment think there's some added value
agreed.
in the interaction that takes place across the table between people that ultimately have a shared objective, but may have different time horizons, may have different priorities, may have different personal interests, and there could be some real problematic misalignment of interests between scheme members and executives of pension schemes, between asset managers and corporate board and executives of companies. So, there's a lot of scope, I think, for the human to still add some value there.
How can, we're coming toward the end, and I promise to try to keep it within 60 minutes. How can the audience that's going to watch or listen to this help you?
Well, I've talked quite a bit today about the need for people that pay into a pension system or pension scheme
Mm.
to be part of this journey of moving to a more authentic and genuinely impactful approach to responsible investment. I don't think we're there. I'm the first to challenge and criticize, and at the same time, I deeply believe in the potential of
Mm.
responsible investment to have a positive influence on our world. And I deeply believe in the responsibility of our financial markets to be accountable for the impacts of their decisions. And I don't think any of it's going to change without people whose money is at work in capital markets being part of that change. So, yeah, I think the answer is get in touch with ShareAction. We are looking to build a much deeper, broader database of people who have a pension fund and want to see their money responsibly invested for the future, for the future of their kids. And not just for the future, for the here and now. It's not even like I'm not going to retire for another little while, 10, 15 years. But I want to see the companies in my pension fund behaving with integrity well short of that date. That would be valuable to me. So if that's your worldview as well, then please be in touch with ShareAction. We're easy to find.
Thank you so much for taking the time to do this. This was fantastic. Oh,